Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this January event brought to you by BCS Nottingham and Derby. Tonight's speaker, John Wright, I'll let him introduce himself when he does his speech, is titled Information Security in the UK Energy Sector. Thank you for joining. I was reminded by our ex-treasurer who joined the call tonight that it was about a year ago he said to me that he was going on holiday to China. And there was some strange virus had been detected over there. We live in strange times. So before I go through pass the baton over to John to do his presentation, I just want to go through a few points of information. Firstly, for our Inclusion and Diversity Officer, I'd be grateful if you could point your phones at that QR code and answer a few short questions. It's just to make sure that we're looking at inclusion and diversity in terms of all of our events. So let's leave on there for about 30 seconds. Just to let you know, all of our events are advertised on our website. The URL is below. If you do a search using your favourite search engine on BCS Nottingham and Derby, you'll find links to our events, including the ones tonight. And on our website, it's got our aims, who the committee are, and all of our upcoming and past events. So all these events are recorded, the ones we do online. So if you want to catch up on any, you'll find the videos there. We also have a LinkedIn group, BCS Nottingham and Derby. Just one other thing, it's not on our website at the moment, but we do have next month's event. I've spoken to the presenter earlier today. It's called Controlling Robots Remotely with Azure and covers IoT, 3D printing, and many other tools I can see in there. So the link to that event will be present probably sometime this week, if not later next week. So it's just the next month's event, which is on the 15th of February. So, John, over to you. I'm hoping you should be able to present.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'll just wait for my magic button to appear and I shall share what I've got. Yeah, lovely. Right, well, I will turn my camera off for a moment and give you my screen. Okay, could you just let me know if that has come up for you yet?
Yes, it's sharing, John.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you this evening. Within the world of IT, you probably often hear people use terms like computer security and IT security and information security and cyber security almost interchangeably. For this evening, I want you to think about information security, which is in its simplest form, quite literally all about the security of information, whether that exists on laptops, servers, cloud storage, mobile devices, printed documents, or just in people's heads. Keeping that information secure is really what information security is all about. Now in Uniper, information security is part of an organizational function called data management, because we are chiefly concerned with Uniper's data. Therefore, we consider computer security, IT security, and cyber security to be component parts of the overall concept of information security. I'll tell you a bit about how the different participants in the UK energy sector collectively do information security, but it's from the perspective of one of those participants. So despite the subject matter undoubtedly being of national importance and hopefully of keen interest, there will be no state secrets divulged tonight, and what you will hear will either be information which is already in the public domain or simply the views of Uniper UK on how we tackle a particular issue. You may well have heard from some of my colleagues from Uniper UK before at similar presentations on different topics, but let me start by briefly explaining who I work for before we get into the details. So if you haven't heard the name of our parent company before, Uniper is an international energy company where our group headquarters are over in Dusseldorf in Germany. We employ around 11,500 people in about 40 countries, including Germany, the UK, Sweden, the Netherlands, United Arab Emirates, and North America. Most of these people are located in Germany, but in the UK, we have around 800 employees, and our head office is in Birmingham. We were founded in January 2016 when a number of assets and activities from the E.ON group were spun off into a totally separate new company, which was called Uniper. We're listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and we have a subsidiary company in Russia called Unipro. And our largest stakeholder is the Finnish energy company called Fortum, and they currently own a 75% stake. So here you can see what Uniper actually does in each of its market units around the world. And when it comes to the UK, we operate a flexible generation portfolio of 7 power stations, a gas storage facility, an engineering academy which offers training to about 4,000 individuals per year, and a variety of commercial activities such as our engineering services division and our trading activities to bring power to the market and balancing services to the national grid. As a generator, our total installed capacity across the whole group is around 34 gigawatts, and 19% of that is in the UK. And our business strategy when it comes to the energy sector is to play a key role in helping the UK reach its net zero targets by 2050. And like many international organisations, we have a group-wide information security function with a local footprint in each country where we operate. Hence why I'm speaking with you this evening from the point of view of how we do things in Uniper UK. Okay, now on to an explanation about how the UK energy sector is organised. So energy is one of 13 economic sectors which are collectively referred to as critical national infrastructure, or CNI. And these are deemed to be critical to the UK's economic interests. As you can see, other sectors include things like finance, health, food, transportation, water, and each of these can be further split down into subsectors. So the energy sector, for example, includes organisations who specialise in electricity, oil and gas. As you might expect, the energy sector also includes the well-known so-called Big Six UK energy suppliers, as well as a whole host of other operators, each of whom have an important part to play in the security of the UK energy sector. Given the importance that the UK government places on the security of the energy sector, each of those operators, both individually and collectively, receives a great deal of support from and collaborates with various parts of the UK government. Up to 2016, this included the CPNI, which are the part of the UK government who provide protective security advice to businesses and organisations. And in 2016, the cyber responsibilities of the CPNI were spun off into the National Cyber Security Centre, which is a part of GCHQ. And the NCSC are the UK's technical authority for all things cyber security. We also deal with the various regulatory bodies in the energy sector, such as BEIS and Ofgem and the Health and Safety Executive. And this kind of tight collaboration is all done with a view to making sure that we can share cyber threat intelligence efficiently, and by working together, quite literally keep the lights on. With that in mind, we're also very aware of the UK's National Cyber Security Strategy, the current iteration of which runs from 2016 to 2021. And this sets out the government's plan to make Britain secure and resilient in cyberspace. So let me turn to focus for a moment on our part in that picture and explain what information security means to us in Uniper UK. In common with many other organisations, the very point of doing information security is to provide value to the business, not to add expense or to make things more complicated. We work for and with the business because without the support and direction from the business, information security exists in isolation. We preserve that link by focusing on the 3 information security attributes of our company's assets. And those attributes are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality refers to keeping our secrets secret, by controlling access appropriately, and this is achieved by things like encryption, data classification, and authentication. Integrity refers to ensuring the quality of data so that it can be trusted, and this is achieved by things like digital signing and protection of data in rest or in motion. And finally, availability. This refers to the quality of being able to access something when it's needed. And this is achieved by things like redundancy, backups, and disaster recovery planning. Our mandate for doing information security is very heavily tied into our parallel activities around health, safety, security, and the environment. And our asset operations vision for information security states that it will be treated equally to health, safety, security, and environment at Uniper. And this gives us a really crucial, strong foundation for talking to the business. And it also gives us genuine top-level management support for information security activities. Uniper UK broadly operates two different types of infrastructure. The first is the traditional office-based functions such as application support, finance, and energy trading, and we refer to this as our IT infrastructure. The second type is industrial control systems and SCADA technologies, which we refer to as our operational technology or OT infrastructure. And this is the sort of stuff you find out in use at our assets in the power stations and the gas storage sites. One of the critical tenets of information security at Uniper is that we cover both IT and OT infrastructure. And in practice, that means that our policies and standards and controls and guidance are all written so they apply to all employees, no matter whether you are a HR advisor sitting in our head office or an engineer working in a control room. Of course, we don't just make up what we think is the best way to defend our organization. The accepted standard for implementing an information security management system in an organization is 27001. And the framework and its associated controls are really what our policies and standards are all based on. We're also bound by various pieces of legislation, including the Network and Information Systems Regulations of 2018. You might have heard that as the NIS regulations or the NIS directive. There's the COMA regulations of 2015, and this is concerned chiefly with the control of major accident hazards, such as oil spills, gas releases, and industrial accidents. And of course, there's the ever-present Data Protection Act of 2018, which enacted the GDPR. As I mentioned, we operate a group-wide information security function with a local footprint in each country, and our central team is around 30 strong. It's led by a CISO, and it's split across 4 general functions. This includes our Cyber Defense Center, which performs 24/7 security monitoring across the whole group, regardless of location or time zone. We have a team responsible for the tools and processes around identity and access management. We have a team focusing on governance, risk, and compliance, and we have a data privacy team, which includes the Uniper Group Data Protection Officer. Something which we have always done, which has certainly become more important over the last year, is to make sure that the practices and the advice that we share with our users around information security can be used both while they are at work, either in a traditional office or working remotely, or in their private lives. Of course, the move towards people working from home is showing no sign of abating and is certainly set to continue for the immediate future. And then finally, there is certainly much to be gained by working together with the UK government and the regulatory bodies and the common suppliers of industrial technologies and tools, and of course, other operators. And with that in mind, there's a number of forums and workshops which exist for these groups to come together and work collectively on information security. So we as a sector are very closely linked with good interfaces into each part of the information security organization in each country. Okay, so as you might expect, given their importance to the UK's economic interests and that energy as a defined sector as part of the UK CNI, energy companies are a prime target for cyber attacks, and this has been borne out by some very high-profile media coverage in recent years. You might be familiar with catchy terms used in the IT media like Stuxnet, WannaCry, Shamoon, Petya, Triton, and indeed there's been 3 notable cyber attacks in the global energy sector since only December. The UK infrastructure support company Amey suffered a ransomware attack in mid-December with a leak of the company's data at the end of December. The Scottish Environmental Protection Agency suffered a cyber attack on Christmas Eve of all days, which is believed to be the work of a criminal gang, and the details are still emerging on that. And there was the well-publicized vulnerability with SolarWinds Orion software, which was used to deploy malware to a massive range of organizations, including the US government, Treasury, and Commerce departments. So I don't want to go too much into the topic of attribution, because there's a whole separate discipline devoted to keeping up to date with who's doing what against whom, who's admitted what, and who's been accused of doing what, all the time asking how reliable conclusions are that can be drawn from that and what the real world implications are for foreign policy. It's not just countries attacking countries, though, although that is going on. So the next 3 slides, I'll try and summarize things by explaining the 3 main types of threat actor that are relevant to the UK energy sector and some of their characteristics. So the first group of threat actors, characterized as nation states. This is all about industrial control systems and SCADA type technologies, which enable the energy sector to work, as well as data which is technically and commercially valuable. As for the likely methods, there are many examples of where a major supplier has suffered an attack or otherwise been compromised upstream, and the implications for their customers downstream are obviously extremely significant. This illustrates the importance of good information security along the entire supply chain, and it's not something that's specific to the energy sector. If you think of any organization like perhaps a bank, a hospital, a supermarket, or a train company, the exact same principles apply. Another method for which there are many clear examples is the good old phishing email, and it's globally accepted that something like 91% of all cyber attacks begin with a spear phishing email, and that includes variants of phishing such as spear phishing, whaling, which is aimed at the big fish in an organization, and smishing, where you get a text message encouraging you to take some action. I don't want to go into how to spot phishing emails because we would probably be here all night, but suffice to say, phishing is a method that works for all attackers, not just nation states. The likely perpetrators when it comes to nation states, related to the UK energy sector, previous attacks have been attributed to Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, and groups that are affiliated with them, which are called advanced persistent threat actors. As for who is likely to be targeted, it could be any company where a foreign power recognizes that they are economically critical, and they could gain either by reducing or diminishing our ability to carry out our functions, or simply by trying to steal what we've got. And there are many well-known, well-researched examples of cyber attacks launched by nation states, including Stuxnet, which was against the Iranian nuclear enrichment facility at Natanz in 2010. That was covered at length in the excellent film called 0 Days. There was the Shamoon malware that was used against Saudi Aramco, first in 2012 and later in 2017. There was the famous Black Energy malware, which took down the Ukrainian power grid in 2015. And then, as I mentioned before, the attack which is being called Sunburst, which targeted the SolarWinds Orion software, which was then used to deploy the Supernova malware. And that has been described as the biggest hack of the US government in years. So very high profile cybersecurity story around the turn of the year. Okay, the second group of threat actors then, these can be characterized as hacktivists. These are individuals or groups who are affiliated with the more traditional and better known campaign groups, and who add an extra element of cyber risk to environmental activism. Now, this can be either organized by such groups to deliberately coincide with activism, or it could be more opportunistic by groups who see an opportunity to piggyback on an environmental protest by a larger group whose values and motivations might be similar to their own. As for the kind of methods, hacktivist methods are more geared towards causing inconvenience, embarrassment, and harassment to their targets. So in the case of a company in the energy sector, You can expect to see examples of distributed denial of service, which is designed to flood a website with traffic in an attempt to take it offline. Brand hijacking, which includes things like domain squatting by purchasing domains that look the same and then buying adverts to try and redirect legitimate traffic. And so-called doxing, which is a term that emerged in the 90s and is given to the internet-based practice of revealing private or identifying information about an individual or an organization. Previous hacktivist activity has been attributed to groups including Extinction Rebellion and Anonymous, who are themselves a collective of smaller groups working independently but under a common banner. There are many more, but those are probably the two better known hacktivist groups. Now, given their motivations, hacktivists commonly go after energy sector organizations who use coal or other fossil fuel in their generation fleets, or those who they perceive to be negatively associated with climate change. Of course, such protests might be planned and publicized in advance by activists in order to further their cause, but of course that's not always the case. One quite recent example of such activism was the protest by Extinction Rebellion at the INEOS oil refinery at Grangemouth back in October. Now, although that didn't appear to have a cyber element to it, it's exactly the kind of red flag action that serves as a warning to operators in the energy sector. Okay, so the third and final group of threat actors, these can be characterized as financially motivated criminals. They organize and operate a more scattergun approach by launching cyber attacks in the hope that they will find a victim somewhere. Their motivation is almost always financial gain. And so they use methods like business email compromise, which is where a third-party company has one of their genuine email accounts compromised, and an attacker uses it as a launching point to send malicious emails to their contacts, leading to ransomware or credential theft or mandate fraud, like payroll redirection at the end of the month. Now, that third party that gets compromised could be a well-known supplier of engineering equipment, in which case we would look at the sender and assume it was safe. Or, of course, it could be a company we've never heard of, but who are still perfectly legitimate, like an art gallery, for example, in which case it might appear a little out of the ordinary to receive an email from them, but perhaps not enough to raise a red flag. Very often, threat actors that work under the financially motivated criminal banner will get most of their basic information when it comes to phishing from places like LinkedIn or social media, where people quite openly post lots of valuable details about their job, their location, and their careers. And it's alarming how much information can be gleaned in that way. Something we particularly spend some time on in Uniper UK is explaining the do's and don'ts while giving people the freedom to publicize their professional qualifications on professional networking sites as they wish. So that's a challenging one to get right. All of this information can be sewn together by a pretty skilled attacker to paint a complete picture of an individual. And indeed, there are good examples of gangs like London Blue who do this on a global scale. Indeed, London Blue are actually one of the largest gangs, and they've been fairly extensively researched to uncover how they're organized, who they target, and the methods they use. It's very interesting. If you did a search just for London Blue, you get a surprising amount of really detailed intelligence about where they operate and the kind of methods they use. Okay, as for the common targets, given that the attacker is financially motivated, the likely targets are any organization or individual, in fact, who they think would rather pay up and get back to work rather than simply dig in their heels and refuse to pay up and accept the hit, or go through the process of recovering lost data and potentially handling it as a data breach. I'm sure you can all tell me examples of emails you've seen, such as get-rich-quick schemes, or emails from politicians and lawyers who need to use your bank account to funnel money out of a war-torn country. My point is that an attacker really needs to make this work is an email account. So this kind of high-volume, low-risk, high-return method is one which will no doubt be around for as long as the world uses email. It's also very difficult to technically defend against it with 100% certainty. as the attacker will, of course, simply use different email accounts and different stories to avoid detection over a period of time. Now, almost all cyber attacks from either nation states or hacktivists or financially motivated criminals will employ some kind of a lure or a hook to make you believe that they are for real. Despite all the complex abbreviations, tools, and systems, it's still human beings that carry out business processes, and it's they who choose how to set up systems in office buildings and power stations, how to configure firewalls, what settings to turn on and leave off, and how to handle emails. To me, this is one of the most fascinating aspects of information security because it goes right to the heart of the human element and the aspects of launching a cyber attack by playing to our needs and our fears and our wants as human beings. If an attacker can catch you in the heat of the moment, their attack is far more likely to succeed. Of course, that assumes that there are no spelling mistakes or grammatical errors in their dodgy emails, but of course, attackers are wise to this, and it's far less common now to get the typical examples of bad typing and poor spelling that was seen in previous years. That's far less common nowadays. It isn't really hard to guess what email system a big company uses. An attacker can find out what your email address looks like. They're likely to be able to guess what platforms you use to share your documents, and they will use all that to make you believe that what you see is the real thing and not a trick. Some kind of a lure which stops the attack being spotted is quite essential to most cyber attacks, and that's especially true if your main target is under pressure, sitting at a keyboard with 100 things to do, deadlines to meet, and a head full of good ideas to do something with. Last year, the world was pretty full with lures, and you only have to recognize some of the media headlines to see events which have been successfully used to hide cyber attacks. For example, everybody was naturally interested to know which country had the most coronavirus infections and how their country compared towards everybody else's. So the Johns Hopkins COVID-19 dashboard was used to trick people into visiting malicious websites and installing malicious software. The same was true for the sale of PPE when stocks were short, NHS test and trace, Brexit, the US elections. In addition, every year sees the regular laws like Black Friday and Cyber Monday shopping deals, HMRC's tax self-assessment deadline, and then Christmas shopping and fake deliveries. These appear again and again, and they all have one objective, which is to try and convince you that what you're seeing is real and to get you to take some kind of action that you would normally not have cause to take. So enough about the scare stories. Let's think about what can be done by individuals and organizations by way of defense, including those in the energy sector. Firstly, there's the people element, because people are arguably both the best defense and also the weakest link. We have to look around and put things into context to gain some strategic threat intelligence. Otherwise, we're simply trying to hold back the tide. Collaboration within our respective industries is absolutely essential, not only to take advantage of the benefits when we act as a collective, but also to share and learn and honestly learn for mutual benefit. Any organization that's concerned about its information security has to engage in at least some kind of mandatory and regular training and awareness to keep it in people's minds, because all too often, if something does happen, people will remember they've been told something about information security in the past, but they might not remember who to ask or what to do as the critical first step. That also means you have to enable bottom-up communication by encouraging people to speak up and report their suspicions, even if they're wrong. And you have to foster top-down support to reinforce the message that you are taking information security seriously. The second element is to do with processes, and we all love a list of processes, I'm sure, but when it comes to information security, you have to know what you've got, and that means knowing all there is to know about your assets. And that is however your organization defines its assets. You need to know where they are, how many, what state they're in, and who's responsible for them. You have to patch early and often, as the world is full of vulnerabilities which have been exploited simply because the attacker found out about them and exploited them before they were able to be patched. That also means that you have to know who supplies your software, your tools, your applications, and you must know who's responsible for addressing security vulnerabilities and performing updates and applying patches. So ergo, you have to know who your suppliers are and who their suppliers are if you are to have the full picture about where you are at risk. Many cyber attacks in the past have shown it's no good simply using a good system. You must know how it's supported, how it's configured, and what kind of risks what kind of risks exist based on the way that you use that system. You have to monitor your infrastructure for security events, and that can be manual, automated, or a combination of both. The market is rife with solutions that promise to do just that for you and make it easier. But in reality, it comes back again to the human question of working out who deals with the alerts, what to do about them, and how to configure your monitoring to recognize what normal looks like so you cut down on the false positives. You have to test your backups and recovery processes, and this is often the regret of any organization that suffered a ransomware attack, or indeed any individual who's accidentally deleted something valuable at home. It's one thing to back up your data, but would you know how to restore your systems to a given state if the worst happened? It's always worth asking that question. And finally, your incident management process. It has to cater for information security incidents, not just conventional infrastructure incidents, which inevitably happen from time to time. So it's worth asking how you and your organization would deal with a cyber attack from either a nation state, a hacktivist, or a financially organized criminal gang. And the third and final element is about technology, and this includes measures to make it as difficult as possible for an attacker to harm you. You have to make it difficult for them to move around in your network and pivot from point to point if they do get in. But of course, you have to balance this with usability in your organizations. Because like I said before, information security exists to serve the business. It's ultimately for the business to decide how to best address the risks they face. Information security essentially acts as the consultant. Many applications and services give you the option of turning on multi-factor authentication. And this is a really good way of preventing somebody who has a username and password of having the keys to the kingdom. Now, that extra layer of authentication can be something like a hardware token, a text message code, or a notification in an app. It's really valuable and it should always be turned on if at all possible. Similarly, think about what security settings exist for the tools and the systems you've got and see what you can turn on. For example, if we accept that email is the most likely attack vector for most people, if you use Office 365, there are many settings to do with email security, such as DMARC, DKIM, and SPF. These will go a long way to making your emails safer if you spend time configuring them properly. And finally, you should always try and start with a zero trust approach to your identity and access management. That means that if nobody has more permissions than they really need, then the possibility of those permissions being misused, either accidentally or deliberately, is fundamentally reduced. So I'd like to try and leave you with a view of the golden rules that exist in our organization, which form the basis of good information security practices for all colleagues. And that's no matter if you're working in the gatehouse of a power station, if you're a part-time admin assistant, or if you're the CFO. These 7 rules form a fundamental part of our security controls, and the spirit of the rules can just as easily be applied at home once you've finished work as they can during work time. The first message is don't share your passwords for any reason. If someone else needs access to something that you've got or the equivalent access that you've got, there is always a more secure way to get them what they need than simply giving them your details because you consider them a friend or a trusted colleague. Get into the habit of locking your device when you are not at your screen. This can also be achieved by implementing a time-sensitive screensaver or a similar control. And this includes remembering not to leave your mobile and your paper documents in view when you're not around. You should always take your time when using email, and it sounds like a challenge, but don't be rushed into doing anything, and always get a second opinion and verify its authenticity if you have any doubt. You have to know how to decide on the classification of your information and what that means when it comes to protecting it based on its classification, and what the rules are about storing it and sharing it both internally and externally. We like to think that the days of having one easy to guess password for all your access is gone, but unfortunately we're all guilty of this in some way, and it's usually a compromise that's made in the interests of practicality. There are many ways to help select suitably complex passwords in line with different requirements, and some password safes also include a password generator, which is a brilliant way to ensure that you not only use individual passwords for individual systems and that they can be stored securely, but also that each of those individual passwords is suitably complex. And it follows that this will pay dividends if a site or a vendor was to fall victim to a data breach and your passwords were leaked. If you know you haven't reused that same password on other sites, social media, or professional networks, you can be reasonably well assured that the fallout will be fairly easily contained. It almost goes without saying, but changing the security settings which can be changed should be discouraged. That means things like skipping scheduled antivirus scans or otherwise diverging from your IT policies, which state what you should and shouldn't do. And finally, the one thing we impress upon all our employees, no matter if they remember every word we say or if they remember just one piece of good information, we reiterate it's not a problem if they can't remember what to do if they're in the heat of the moment, but they do have to know where to go for help. And that is one of the purposes of having local information security officers around Uniper. It's to act as that local contact who has the remit to devote time and effort to both individuals and teams to help steer them correctly. So I've summarized the rules as they appear to our users here, but it underscores the fact that we're dealing with human beings at the end of the day. And these rules are used in Uniper to get people thinking just about getting the basics right, but reminding them that we're not wielding a club here. We're not a scary organization. As I said, we exist within our company to provide value to the business, and we recognize that it's a business that's carried out by human beings. So let me try and relate this back to you and your organizations. I'm sure that no matter if you're a small, medium, or large enterprise, you'll have something documented about what you should and shouldn't do when it comes to protecting your assets and your information. As I mentioned before, we have a framework of policies and standards in Uniper which tell you what the rules are, how they apply to different roles and business activities, why they exist, and how to make sure you actually follow them. And there are certain technical measures which can be used to enforce the rules, but it comes back again to information security being a human discipline at its heart. So no matter if you're thinking about email security, protection of documents, or dealing with a supplier, it's always a person that gets to choose how and when to act. And we should never lose sight that it's human beings that make the difference, as cliched as that might sound. For a little further reading, this link will take you to a public-facing website which provides a little more detail about the collective information security work of the UK energy sector. And this acts as a reference point to some of our key information security activities and standards and initiatives. As I mentioned in the early part, there's no state secrets there. It's a fairly broad overview of how the organisations work both together with the government, with the regulators, and with suppliers. So my thanks for your attention. I hope you found that somewhat enlightening. Does anyone have any questions?
So John, yes, I forgot to mention to everyone at the beginning, apologies for that, that we do have a number of questions in the chat, and my colleague Gary, as soon as I release the microphone to him, we'll go through those with you. If anyone wants to ask a question, please put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you prefer to ask directly. So Gary, I just asked you to unmute.
Okay, right, we've got a few questions already, and I'll just repeat, if you could submit your questions in the questions panel and then, or the chat panel, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. So first of all, we've got Daryl who's asking, you mentioned 3 cyber attacks since December. Have they been given names yet? And can you share them for research purposes?
Yeah, the 3 which were thanks, Daryl. The 3 which were particularly pertinent to us in the energy sector. Let me just go back to well, if I can start with the one which was probably the best example. It was the SolarWinds Orion attack. Initially, the much of the information was from it's centered around the data that had been used for penetration testing. It then transpired that the chain was slightly longer than it first appeared. The data which is available around that is fairly sparse. When you look at official sources, you will get much more information by using cybersecurity websites like Bleeping Computer, Krebs, the Register, those kind of sites, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. The kind of detail of information which is publicized about those attacks and those kind of attacks never usually comes to light until significant time has passed after recovery and after some good attribution work has been done. And even then, it doesn't always happen. The case with the SolarWinds Orion situation was obviously very heavily covered in the media because of its reach, and it turns out that there are many industries and governments and companies that used the SolarWinds Orion software, and so it was more the big headline about that was more in terms of the scope of its reach rather than the details behind the story. I mentioned the cyber attack on the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. That appears to have somewhat gone under the radar simply because it happened on Christmas Eve. I believe it was only a few days ago that there were details confirmed about that it was in fact a cyber attack and not anything to do with general infrastructure or an accidental data breach. But again, these topics, there is a whole industry devoted to researching attribution, and if you're a particularly technically minded cybersecurity professional, you could spend years analyzing different strains of malware to try and uncover telltale hints about who's done it and who made it look like who done it and those kind of questions. So there is unfortunately no kind of end date when we can draw a line under any of these attacks and say we've got the full picture. So to really give you a short answer, or to give you a short answer to a simple question, all of those details continue to emerge. We are particularly interested in them because they could be nation state sponsored. There could be a new strain of malware which has not been seen before, or it could be a complete ruse. You know, we could be going down a rabbit hole and then be turned around halfway and realize that it was actually attributed to somebody else for a very different reason. It's always important when we look at cyber attacks when they happen, to look at the sources where they're covered, but also to step back and look at what's in the news. It's often quite easy to put the pieces together and say why a certain industry was attacked or a certain country was attacked, but it's not always the case. I'll give you you remember the Salisbury poisonings, the Novichok poisonings. There was the fallout from that was rumored to be a retribution attack after the war of words between different governments. So the energy sector in all countries was listening very carefully because, as I said in the talk, you know, we're part of the UK's critical national infrastructure, and it's a prime target, you know, especially for a nation state with significant time and resources to undertake an attack like that. So I've gone a little bit off topic. I'm sorry, Dal, but yeah, the short answer to your question is really that there is no end date to these stories, and you will find the more you dig, the more you learn. I hope that's answered your question.
Yes, it appears that we're getting a thumbs up from Daryl. Thank you, John. Next question is from Nick. He asks, what subscriptions do you recommend for keeping abreast of relevant cyber news and impacts? Is there a utility forum available for energy organizations to collaborate safely on IT security topics?
Yes, Mick, absolutely there is. I would preface the answer by saying the more you read, the more you research, the more you risk information overload. And that's the case for all industries. If I dive back up to my previous link, this site that I mentioned, it's a public-facing website, but I would use that as a good starting point because it references some of the industry groups and forums that I alluded to. And those groups are attended by fellow operators, fellow generators, fellow gas storage operators, everybody in the energy sector, but also the National Cybersecurity Centre, Ofgem, BEIS, all the key players that you would consider to be the authors of good, credible cybersecurity threat intelligence. So if you are an energy sector company and you're not already linked into those groups or you want to learn a bit more, I would suggest that link is probably a really good place to start.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Laura. She asks, lots of workers are now working remotely who haven't worked from home before. What do you see as the next biggest threat or potential to become the hacking trend with this shift?
Great question, Laura. In UNIPA, we have a group-wide project which is incorporating that very question, not just from an information security perspective, but looking at what the new normal should be for our entire organization. This recognizes that the days of a traditional office-based role are probably now over, and it would be hard to imagine us going back to 9 to 5 in an office, so to say. As for what that means for cybersecurity and the threats that we face, I think the three groups that we covered, the nation states, the hacktivists and the financially motivated criminals, they will probably stay the three prime groups that we are aware of. But the sort of threats and the risks that we face will be in an increasingly remote workforce. So thinking about questions like security of your home router, physical security of your home office, handling physical documents, when to print something, when to destroy it, asking what you throw away in the recycling, those kind of questions which people never really had to consider when they were in the office have now become very pertinent. So holding conversations in your home study when you've got workmen coming in or something like that. I mean, having said that, there's a lot that can be said that it's now been made much safer because employees arguably are more attuned to their physical security when they're at home and in a family environment. But in terms of the threats that companies are likely to face, not just energy companies, I think that the trend now is irreversible, and the more that we use things like Zoom, Teams, or GoToMeet, or WebEx, whatever your mobile meeting technology is, there's going to be a massive dependence on that, and so IT organizations have to make sure they scale up in response to that, but do that securely, so that we don't rush ahead in an effort to appease the business and make sure there's no IT incidents at the cost of a good information security regime. So it's definitely a balance that we have to be aware of in the future.
Great, thank you, John. Malcolm asks, 27001 is now over 7 years old. Is your business sector involved in the formation of the next edition?
Yes, 27001 is the sort of the backbone for our policies and standards and practices across the entire group. Now, as I mentioned, we have a footprint in many different countries, and our choice of 27001 as the backbone for those policies and standards was done while recognizing that there are many country-specific variations on those similar controls. For example, in Germany, there is a whole set of national security laws which have to be borne in mind alongside 27001. Similar in Sweden, and in the UK, we're very heavily regulated by the NIS regulations now. As for what the future looks like, I think we'll continue to take the best parts of the controls that 27001 offers us, because it's a good way to map threats and risks and controls together. But we don't want to lean on it too heavily, because yes, it is an older standard, still relevant for us and the way that we do business, but it's not something that that can be assumed to be, you know, suitable indefinitely, and that's the same for any standard. But in terms of the other references and the legislation and the standards that we also use, we use a lot of the NIST framework, and we take a lot of what's good about what they do in Germany, because the BSI in Germany, the Federal Security Office, share a good deal with Uniper about what they believe good cybersecurity practice looks like. So that's just one example of where we kind of supplement 27001 with some local variations of rules and policies and standards. So we were aware that 27001 isn't going to be the be all and end all. I hope that's some kind of answer, Malcolm.
Thank you. Olivia asks, do you also address security of industrial control systems, or is that covered in another part of your department/company? ICS tend to have different remediation strategies or measures than for back office systems.
Yes, good point, Olivia. Yes, we do. We cover both. We cover both the IT, the conventional, office suite of applications, and also the OT stuff, which is the pure ICS and SCADA technologies. There are a lot of challenges in trying to cover both sets of infrastructure under a common umbrella. But within the UK, we've got a really good network of local experts at each of our sites called Information Security Resources, as we term them. And these are almost our local volunteers who know the systems and the tools at each site. And they form part of our information security stakeholder map. Because as you quite rightly said, ICS remediation is very different to Office 365 remediation. There's a whole different set of risk assessment methodologies that we use on our OT infrastructure, like FMEA and Bowtie. But yeah, the reason that our information security organization can work as well as it does is because we deliberately cover both sides of the coin. We've got the IT on one and the OT on the other, but we're acutely aware that a one-size approach cannot work. One-size-fits-all approach cannot work, simply because of the differences in the kind of infrastructure we're dealing with. Yeah, I think that's common to all energy sector operators. I can't speak for them specifically, but I think it's fair to assume that any company that has an asset base which is based on ICS technologies and an office base which is your traditional office-based roles like HR, tax, and finance faces the same kind of questions that we do.
Very good. And Glossop asks, do you give guidance to staff about what home routers to have or use?
Good question, Blossom. Yeah, no, we don't. Is the quick answer. That's a difficult line to draw because, of course, the function that we have within Uniper UK is to secure the company's data. As I said, we're part of a function called data management, and we're all about protecting Uniper's data. However, of course, everybody's at home nowadays, and we're worrying about things like router security and default passwords and stuff like that. I see as part of this new normal push, our remit in information security is going to get more into that area. As it stands at the moment, or if you looked at this time last year, we would give them some suggestions and guidance about what a secure password looks like, and basic checks they could do on their home routers. But it would be optional. Fast forward to where we are today, with no return to the office in sight, at least for the short term. I think we're almost forced into a position where we have to take that a little bit more to the fore. So yes, I think we will be very soon thinking about those detailed questions like, can people walk past and see in your windows? Do you print securely? Do you have lockable storage at home where you can store your documents? And amongst those questions will be things like, have you checked the default password on your router? You know, just those kind of questions which we would have previously have considered to be a bit too personal. We would probably bring to the fore now, because we've quite frankly got no choice. You know, our workforce is at home, and you know, they've taken our assets with them, so we have to change in order to adapt to that.
Okay, next question is from Adil. You mentioned that a lot of data is available for some notorious groups like the ones in London.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it strange that they are still at large despite their trends and attack vectors as public knowledge?
Yeah, Adil, that's a good point to pick up on. The group I mentioned is called London Blue. They're actually based in Nigeria. The group itself has been operating in that way for many, many years. This is a good example because it underscores the inherent difficulty of imposing cybersecurity regulation across borders. Each country has very different ways of handling things and different priorities. I would say the research that's been done on groups that are outside the UK, such as London Blue, that are financially motivated, is pretty extensive, and this market that exists in good quality cybersecurity threat intelligence has lent itself quite well to that. London Blue are probably the best known criminal financially motivated group within cybersecurity, but of course they're not the only one. For threat actors that are found to be in the UK, we get the full weight of the National Cybersecurity Centre and the police and the government to help us if we suffer any kind of cybersecurity event, which can be pinned down to something in the UK. But once you step outside the UK and you start to look at operators that are physically not within the UK's borders, it becomes very difficult. And there is no easy answer to solving that. Again, I think that you can read lots about many different groups that have operated in the same way, almost with impunity. But it just puts the emphasis on us as organisations to defend ourselves as best we can, but also on the UK government to step up and meet us, to help us out with resources and good quality legislation and measures that can be imposed across borders.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one more question, and I'm going to skip ahead to a very direct security question from Jane. How long has Uniper been using the IEC 62443 suite of documents for security, or IACS? Well,
as I mentioned in the intro, Uniper was spun off from the split of E.ON in 2016. The variety of assets that were split off to create Uniper were in the most part our generation assets in the UK. They were using 62443 when we were E.ON. E.ON have continued as a legally separate, completely independent company to Uniper, but we as Uniper UK still use 62443, and 62443 goes a long way to creating our policies and standards that are directly applicable to our operational technology. So, for example, how to report cybersecurity incidents in a control room, or a malware infection on a HMI controller or something like that. So we've been using 62443 for many years, certainly pre-2016. I hope that's an answer for you, Jane.
Very good. Right, handing back to Paul.
Okay, thank you very much, John. That was a very good presentation, just like the one you did in the office. So excellent, thank you. Good. So that's the end of our session this evening. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions, but we're going to keep it to the hour because there's another session coming on after this on this channel. So thank you all. Look out for our event being advertised on our website coming up on February the 15th. And have a good evening. Thank you all.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.